My first memories of Britain really were the fact that I realised that I was going to leave my parents. And I'd never really left my mother before. And I knew that my grandfather from my father's side was really unhappy that I was going. And I didn't know how far Britain was. The distance didn't make any sense to me. I knew Karachi was a long way away because it took a day and a half, 2 days to get there. But Britain made no sense to me. It just meant a place of incredible wealth and power.
My father came over here first. I think it wasn't so much the poverty that drove us here. I mean, we were quite comfortable when we were over there. I think it was more, I suppose the people in the ex-colonies thought, well, we were going to get a better standard of education if we went to England, and that was the main reason why we came here. Well, my father came here, and 12 months later we joined him.
It was cold. We came in October 1961, and you know, I'd never seen snow before. It snowed that year. It was cold. I didn't really want to be here. I missed my mum and my sisters, and it was quite a shock in terms of, you know, being in a totally different country.
My first memory was, I think, firstly landing at the airport and standing there and looking at all these different coloured people, you know, white people, African, black people, as such, and looking straight up into these people's eyes and seeing different coloured eyes and thinking that they were marbles, because in the village I used to play marbles, and the marbles are different green and blues and whatever, and thinking that these people had marbles in their eyes.
I remember feeling very cold at the airport because it was sometime in March, early March I think we arrived, and I think I was fascinated by the, you know, the vapour coming out of our mouth when we were breathing.
I was really homesick, and it was, as you know, the university start around October, and I was studying at the University of Nottingham. I went to the shop and I began to talk to somebody, Pakistani guy, and it's about 17 days I was in Nottingham, and the guy said, I've been here for 17 years. And I thought, how the hell this guy can live in this country for 17 years? So it was like very much kind of strange country for me.
Well, I think life generally for people that came from the colonies was quite bleak, because it didn't matter what qualifications you had, didn't matter what skills you had, you were still given the jobs that nobody else would do. So, I mean, my father was a businessman before he left Pakistan, and when he came here he started working in a foundry in the steelworks.
We didn't find it strange that we didn't have separate rooms, or we didn't have our own whatever you call private spaces, so it didn't really matter the fact that lots of us were put into a room together and we were sleeping in, you know, in the beds. What was strange was there were shifts on who went into beds, who slept in which bed, you know, that was a bit odd.
My father had bought a house, and in the house there was a Sikh family, and so between the Sikh family and ourselves we were sharing the house. I was there in Pakistan when the war between India and Pakistan took place, and the hills surrounding the village suddenly had these big anti-aircraft guns, because our village was very close to an oil refinery, and the oil refinery got painted. So there's a lot of nationalism, patriotism, you know, that I grew up in. And so when I arrived in England, I just couldn't understand why my father was staying with Indians and Sikhs. You know, why this family, who I was grown up to believe that these were the people going to deny our existence and we were at war with, was staying at my family. So I remember having a fight, in fact, with a young Sikh boy.
In Bradford, we didn't cook like we used to cook in Pakistan. There were no women. That was the first very strange feeling. They were all men. And, you know, we had rats in the cellar. It was, we cooked once. You know, if you made tea, you didn't make tea in a cup, you made it in a great big pot, and you drank it until it finished. and it was the food was cooked and it had to be finished. It was just very, very large amounts of food, and we were all very poor. So everybody who was working, well, they weren't just working for themselves. They all had lots of people to support in Pakistan.
I went to a school in Thornbury, and it was quite strange. You know, I quite liked it. You know, there was lots of children. My main recollection of that school was that, having told the school that, you know, I was a Muslim and I couldn't eat meat because they didn't provide halal meat at the time, that on one particular occasion a teacher took sympathy with me because I was purely eating vegetables. And in those days, the teacher, there was always a teacher at the head of the table, as it were, you know, with a number of children sat around. She took pity on the diet that I was on and decided to force feed me a sausage. So that was quite a traumatic experience, really, because, you know, having been told by my dad that we couldn't eat meat and things like this, that I was force fed a sausage at the age of 6 in infant school.
School, like most kids, there's always a challenge meeting new people, constantly starting all over again. Not knowing the language didn't actually help, and a lot of the times we got into fights, I would say, purely because we couldn't understand what was being said to us verbally, but I suppose the body language said quite a lot to us, and hence the reason there was quite a lot of violence around.
We were attacked as we were going on buses. We were attacked when we got off buses. And the only way we could survive was to meet lots of friends from other schools.
I remember whenever I got into a fight at the junior school, I always took my shirt off, because there was this thing about, well, if I got my shirt dirty, I'd get another crack at home, right, for coming back. You know, a white clean shirt going into school and coming back with all muck on it. So I always took my shirt off for some odd reason.
There was one particular guy whose name was James, was the sort of school bully, basically, decided to call me a monkey. So first of all, he started sort of calling me a monkey, and then he started calling me a packy, and then a blackie, and he you know, being a bully, he'd sort of managed to get other school children, you know, to sort of call me names, and that culminated in a fight eventually, and it was in fact a student teacher that stopped the fight, and you know, and he'd obviously had problems with this bully as well, because his remark to me was that, you know, next time I should hit him harder.
Not all white children were brutes. I think that many white kids were forced into fighting their own friends. I mean, that happened with a very, very close friend of mine who really didn't want to join the white kids when we had a full-fledged battle in the school with virtually every white kid on one side and all the Asian kids on the other side.
I know we faced quite a lot of racism into all the girls, not even the ones who were born in this country, because there were some girls who didn't want to sit next to us, things like that. But we just put it down to bad manners, and sometimes we complained and sometimes we just let it go. But because we were in our own group.
I noticed in Bradford that they had what was known as immigrant classes, and the first thing that happened to me was that I got put in an immigrant class as soon as I came into Bradford, and generally these were the you know, children that had come from abroad recently, and were all sorts of ages. So the people were in this class was in different chronological age. So there was much older children in the school, in the same class. And essentially, they'd put me in the wrong year group. When they looked at my report, they just dumped me in this immigrant class, saying, "Oh, here's another Asian boy that's come to school," type of thing.
You know, I'd said to the teachers, look, I can speak English now, I can read it. Why do I still have to remain in the stream that's learning English? We used to have streams in those days. And I wasn't getting anywhere, so I had to get my uncle to go into school to say, look, he speaks English, why is he having to learn English again? So on the educational front, we were fighting very, very hard.
I remember coming home one day after a history lesson at school and sharing the information with my father about what I'd just been taught that day. And my father sort of corrected me. Not because he was that educated in historical facts of India, but his own experiences. I was taught in my history lesson how good the empire was for India, and we built the roads for the uncivilized people out there, and etc. When I come and share that with my father says, well, most of the roads were already there, right? Some roads were built by the Raj, but they weren't built for the benefit of the Indians. They were built so that they could get the stuff out of India a lot quicker, right, and more conveniently. As far as civilization is concerned, you know, that we were running around in silks when this lot was still in animal skins. So I went back and shared that information with my school history teacher. I wasn't very popular with the teacher after that, because it meant I was challenging well-founded, as far as well-founded could be, belief of what the empire was about.
By the time we left school, you know, I think we'd gone into a strike with, or we'd participated in some joint political activity with all the kids. Something, the National Union of School Students or something like that was formed. I can't remember it all now, but there was a time when we all participated together. So it wasn't all, it didn't happen all the time, but I think the political activity came knocking into our lives, really. We had to understand, why is it that somebody hates me so much or hates us so much? What are we doing here after all? And by that stage, we began, we were reading a lot. We read the socialist papers and the left papers and the Marxist literature and also the non-Marxist literature. We were reading a lot by the time I was certainly 17, 18. I was reading all sorts of stuff. I'd be in the library at the crack of, as soon as it opened, and I'd be there until it closed. Because there used to be a cafeteria in the library, so I could eat there as well. And I'd wait until friends came in, would buy me some soup and bread and things like that. So I virtually lived in the library. And because I lived surrounded by books, I just read a lot. I had nothing else to do during the day. Didn't have family, didn't have homes, and I just read as much as I could. And I began to understand that the world I lived in was really fundamentally unfair. I began to understand that this country was rich because we were poor. And I also began to understand that we were here because they were there, and I really believed in that.
The activity of the National Front and how they were mobilising and wanting to sort of essentially repatriate the Asian community. All this talk about the Asian community stealing our jobs, stealing our homes, stealing our women, that kind of stuff that was going on. So it was really, in part, I suppose, to defend our homes. They used to come into our sort of area. And in fact, in 1976, the National Front decided to hold a meeting in a school in the heart of where we lived.
And the march, the big anti-fascist march led by sort of the leaders of the time, ended up in the city centre. Now, we lived in Manningham, or lots of us lived in Manningham. We marched to Manningham, broke through police lines, ran, sneaked, because Manningham was ours, and we had to protect it.
That was my first recollection of a riot in Bradford, basically. You know, where police cars were turned over, paint was thrown at them, and being chased by, you know, police on horseback.
It was there that we really started thinking we've got to get our own house in order.
That was, I suppose, the first real campaign that I can recollect.
We were very confident that we had lots and lots of people with us, and I think that would have been the seeds of where the Asian youth movements began to be formed.
I remember his death, I remember the shock in the community. Yeah, it was a very vivid and a personal experience for me. We went to Dominion Centre, which was a big cinema in those days, and his body was laid out there, and we all went to look at it and marched past it, and the community was very united in its grief, and people were feeling very angry. Young people particularly were. Yeah, that was that was a turning point, I think, in my memory, and for a lot of people in South as well. Young.
We were all young people. I suppose historically we were all fragmented all over the place, right? And we all had it was almost a magnet pulling us all together.
There were big debates. We should integrate. We said no, there's nothing to integrate into. The British culture that we loved and adored was the culture of those who were fighting against British capitalism, British colonialism, and there were many of those. It's not like today.
Within the AYM, we had, you know, Hindu members, Christian members, Sikh members, Muslim members. We had Gujaratis, we had Punjabis, we had Sri Lankans. The important bit for us was to keep hold of our sense of being humans. We were a generation that was saying no. We were not the generation that was thinking about, well, we've got family back home and we need to look after them and etc., because our parents had done that.
When we found out that the fascists had planned, they were coming down the M1, they were going to come down the M1, they were mobilising across London and they were going to attack Brick Lane. So we'd get a phone call from Scratchwood Services, we think so many people have gone, you know, coach load or whatever, then we'd get another phone call from another part, because we didn't have mobiles, remember. These were all from public call boxes or cafes or wherever people could do so into a phone. We would then have to phone out to people who you know, engaged in, or we had runners as well. Somebody would run physically, say, look, they're not at the top, they're going to coming down at the bottom. And we did know where the fascists were. We had an idea there were likely to be a couple of hundred. We did have punch-ups as well. You know, we kept them off the streets, and it was really terrible because it was the same day as they'd organised this Rock Against Racism concerts. There were hundreds of people dancing to racism, and it was a ridiculous state of affairs. So ridiculous, I believe they endangered the black community of Brick Lane and did a terrible disservice to the struggle against racism. But it was a harbinger of what was yet to come, because they did that over and over again. You know, in a sense, they were so preoccupied with their own agenda, they forgot to see what area the shit was hitting where.
I think we all probably felt that there was we did need something like similar to Bradford Youth Movement. First of all, there were so many deportations going on. Mostly the people that were actually involved in doing anything with the Asian community were mostly older Asian community workers, but a lot of it was the religious leaders, you know, those kind of things. There was nothing for the young people.
I think it was when I was at the Polytechnic and I was studying fine art, and what happened was that it was late at winter and I was walking through the corridors and I saw a poster about the Bradford 12 and it caught my eye. I stood there and looked at it, I was brought to tears. It said, "Until these 12 are free, we'll all forever be imprisoned." I took the poster off and rolled it up and decided that I was going to do whatever I could to support these 12. I realised that what I'd experienced in terms of the racist abuse and racism, the insecurities I experienced, not sense of not belonging, that was something that was shared by a whole group of individuals, and it was something unique to me as a people, as a community, and suddenly that inspired me, and I found collective support and strength in that. As we were focusing around the Bradford 12, we organised a public meeting. You know, suddenly we were taking control of our own lives, our destiny. And then when the attack took place on the restaurant, I think that made us realise that we needed to have a permanent organisation. There was an attack upon a restaurant. The restaurant workers and the owner defended themselves, and the racists went away, came back much more organised and smashed the windows, and a fight took place. They grabbed the till. Quite a few of the restaurant workers got beaten up, and when the police came, and lo and behold, it was the restaurant workers who were arrested, and subsequent meetings took place, and as a result of that, the AYM was born, and we campaigned for the release and for justice for Ahmad Khan.
We organised individual campaigns with a very clear-cut objective of exposing, through the plight of an individual, the plight of a community. We didn't think we were social workers. We weren't paid to do this. We were always explaining that, you know, how Labour Tory had colluded.
We realised that the Tories would come into power and make laws, and then Labour would come in. In opposition, Labour would be critical, but when Labour came into power, it was more about, well, we can go further than you. So the game has always been the same, and it's still going on. It's to see who can go the furthest to the right without putting the swastika on.
I was born in Britain, Birmingham, lived in Rochdale and Manchester. My parents separated, they were divorced. The children were given to the mother by court, but my father, you know, like my mother gave my father the daughters, and my father sent us to Pakistan. My husband got his permanent stay first, and then we applied for the children, and the answer was that these are not your children. It just went on and And then the first meeting I went publicly was Nazira Begum's and Nasreen Akhtar from Rochdale. There was a public meeting and I went down to that public meeting. And there was a question at the end of the meeting, has anybody else got a problem? And I just stood up and told what I was going through. I says, yes, I have got a problem. And this is what I'm going through, that I've got 3 children that were born there and they're not allowed. And I've given all the birth certificates, the documents, everything, photographs. And that's where the Defence Committee was all set up, saying that we'll come to Rochdale. And that's where all the struggle started.
There was no way we were willing to accept such a terrible injustice that a mother could be denied unification with her kids. And Anwar was a very strong woman, not a woman who would sit down and take things, whatever was thrown on her. But then she was a mother who was not willing to give up her basic right. When Anwar spoke, and if there were 300 men in the room and she was the only woman, she had 300 people crying, you know, they're my children, they're coming over here, they will come over here, you will not keep my children from me. We felt that the issues we were fighting were as basic as that. The denial of our families to live together in some sense of dignity.
Initially, 2 organizations, both Bradford and Manchester Asian Youth Movement, participated, and we used to meet in Rochdale for the committee, and also some of the left organizations like RCG also operated with us.
They all got together and said that, you know, we'll form a defence committee called the Anwar Dita Defence Committee. The first ever picket we did was in front of the Conservative Party. It was an office on Drake Street, and that's where we held the first picket. And from there on, it was just non-stop. The campaign just grew and grew and grew. Photographs had to be tested. We gave that. Then I had to give a medical internal examination. I had to go through a gyno to prove that I gave birth more than 1 child. So that is that was a really, I don't know how to describe it, it's like being abused by the system. That's how I felt.
I came into the Anwar Dita case after the appeal had already been lost. I was no part of the legal proceedings, but I was part of trying to change what had happened. And I was brought into the case by the Asian Youth Movement, who had taken up Anwar's case.
Well, we all started organising public meetings, we distributed leaflets, we went to the press on a regular basis, we organised demonstrations, we organised pickets at the appeal courts, and all that needs, in a way, skills that we've developed over the years.
World in Action became involved and financed a team, small team of a presenter and so on, to go to Pakistan. I went with them, and we tried to trace every aspect of Anwar's period of time when she'd been in Pakistan, to authenticate that time, and the fact that she'd had children. And then we arrived back with other bits of evidence, and then the World in Action programme was finalised and it was shown on television, and it just gave the lie to such a ridiculous nonsense on the Home Office part. And the morning after the programme was shown, there was an announcement that Anwar's children could now come.
Every time they turned me down, it made me more stronger with the campaign. People supporting me, backing me. And that is something that I'll never forget, in the sense that people believed me. Government never believed me, but people believed me. And they stood with me side by side, despite what the newspapers said or the government said.
It was July the 11th, 1981. And that was a day when there were lots and lots of riots up and down the country in lots of different places. And we'd heard rumours that the National Front or fascists or skinheads were coming to Bradford. In fact, the police had gone round and said that. And they told everybody to stay indoors. Now we took a view that's totally wrong. We're not going to stay indoors. We're going to get out and we're going to organise people and we're going to fight back. Now, during the course of the day, I did ask one of my friends, Talochan, that time, that we should make petrol bombs and we should store them in a safe place. And if need be, we'll use them. And we didn't actually plan much more than that. We just thought about that because at that time petrol bombs were quite being used in Southall. The pub had just been burnt down. We didn't have very much else. And we really did believe that if the skinheads came, it would be a pretty nasty battle and we were not going to let them get through. But that day in the city centre, lots and lots of youth gathered.
The important thing for me really was that, here was a group of people that wanted to defend the city against any sort of threat of extreme right-wing groups coming into the city. And they had prepared some petrol bombs, which they didn't use. Nothing really happened in Bradford. And I believe that self-defence is no offence.
The reason I became involved in the Bradford 12 case was because I knew two of the defendants in it before from a legal case that we'd worked in together. That was Tariq and Talochan Gatawara. Both Tariq Ali and Talochan had been instrumental in the case of Anwar Ditta's children, and then all of a sudden they end up as defendants charged with conspiracy offences, very, very serious conspiracy to make explosive substances, to endanger life, etc., which would have carried life imprisonment if they'd been convicted.
The important thing for me was that the support was there for the Bradford 12.
I remember going to one very, very early meeting when all the defendants, including Tariq and Talochan, were locked up in Armley Prison. And there were Sikhs in their 70s and 80s and elderly Muslim parents, that a whole range of support saying, in a sense, these are our children, support them, defend them.
The fact that there was a campaign affected the way that prisoners related to us, affected the way that prison officers related to us.
What we used to do is have rotas so that people could attend and to ensure that there was a certain number of people that were attending. It wasn't always that there was masses of people there, but the important thing was keeping the campaign going and ensuring that there were people there at some point during those sort of during the sort of hearings and at the time.
I think we were very proud. I mean, I think we were worried because nobody wants to be in prison. But at the same time, when we went into courtroom, every time we came up, every 7 days in front of the magistrates' court, now we knew that there were hundreds of people who wanted to know what was going on. The courtrooms were full. The police had to organise something. And when we came in, they knew that political prisoners were coming and not criminals were coming. So we felt really good. We felt very, very strong that there's nothing they could do to us now. They charged us. They couldn't put us down. The worst they could do is lock us up. And we had lots and lots of people shouting and screaming in our defence. And I think it's when the trial started when it really made the impact, certainly, on all of us. You could hear it inside the courtroom. In fact, the judge was ordering people to stop shouting outside. And it was wonderful walking through lots of people.
The police and the prosecution believed until the very beginning of the case that the defence was going to be based on denial of any involvement in any activity to do with the making of petrol bombs.
We argued, in a sense, that We did make them. We would have used them.
The police and the prosecution were absolutely flabbergasted, and that element of surprise I think was tremendously important, because the defendants then just took the courtroom by storm, really, and the jury listened very, very, very carefully.
The jury felt proud, proud, as we found out at the end, that they were very proud of being involved in the campaign, because they was wearing Free Bradford 12 t-shirts under their clothes,
We said there aren't 3 R's, there are 4 R's. Right, so, well, I don't know how you get the R in writing, but right, but it was reading, writing, arithmetic and racism. These had to be the 4 R's in education. And once you get the racism bit in there as well, once you start teaching history as history is or was.
And it was in 1983 that the council developed multicultural policies, some of which was based on the recommendations that we had made in our article. These were issues about sort of acknowledging people's religious requirements. So they had to address religious issues. They had to address linguistic issues. They had to sort of have a better understanding of the modes of dress, for example, of children from different religious backgrounds. So that was one of the things that we said that was important. But we never asked for multicultural education. What we were demanding was anti-racist education, in actual fact.
I think Imperial Typewriter Strike actually signifies kind of industrial turmoil taking place, which is basically that in factories where most of the South Asians were employed, you have two-tier system. And in many of those struggles and disputes, if you look through it, trade unions basically opposed the strikes. So there was no option but for us to mobilize the communities to support the strikers. And Imperial Typewriter is one of the best examples of what I call it community action come industrial action, because we used to raise huge amount of funds. People used to come and give us food for strikers and so on and so forth. And of course, many of those strikes we lost. But what we did is to change the way the white trade union, and especially Transport and General Workers Union or Knit Worker, Housery Workers Union, where because they're mostly worker in textile, or General Union kind of, they began to change their attitude towards black workers.
We ended up organising pickets in Air Valley Yards. The workers were largely Asian, and they were sort of being not given the same rights as the white staff in essence. That campaign, lasted quite a while. They didn't win anything at the end of the day. The trades unions didn't support them. Whilst the Trades Council and certain members of the Trades Council did turn up on the picket lines, the pickets were largely, from the Asian youth movement in terms of supporting the workers there.
Under those kind of circumstances, we had no choice but to build allegiances, to build broad fronts, to work with other groups and get their support. So when the miners' issues happened, we were very, very involved. We used to go onto the Old Grief to the miners' picket lines. We used to knock on the windows, get our members out in the morning, and get them the minibuses and take them every single day down to the miners' picket line. And I remember on one occasion, this disgruntled young lad that I'd woken up at 6 in the morning, when we arrived there, one of the miners, not all of them, but one of the miners turned round and said, "What the hell is this package doing here?" So this young lad turned around to me and goes, "Thank you very much, for waking me up at 6 in the morning only to get racist abuse." And to my response, "Well, brother, you've got to recognise that, we can see the bars and some of them can't. But I think the miners for us, some of the mining communities that we went and stayed with, the way that we were treated, the humility, the humbleness of the miners, the hatred that we had for the police and the siege that we experienced in our communities, and the way we were being treated by the police, I saw that echoed by the mining families. We were learning about other people's oppression. Class and race and imperialism, all those things came together for us.
Once the Asian Youth Movement formed, and we also had education programs for ourselves, I did a lot of reading. I mean, I probably did more reading since I left school, right? And I just extensively read on what was happening around the world. I read quite a lot of stuff by Marx, Lenin, but that's not to say that I didn't read other things as well. But I was attracted to their writings because they talked about things that affected the community that I came from.
We were being influenced a lot by the American, Black Power movement, and certainly the American political movements.
There were lots of activities, lot of activities in supporting the liberation movements across. So from Ireland on one side, we're talking about, I remember, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, South Africa, Palestine, of course, one of them.
We did not understand or accept how a Jew born somewhere in the world had a right to return to a place he had no connection with. Yet Palestinians who were born there had to live in refugee camps. And this Palestinian issue was just brought to the fore in those days with people like Leila Khalid.
Birmingham had a large Irish community, and Birmingham AYM members worked with those Irish comrades, and somewhere along the line some of them said, well, we'll organise a delegation to Ireland. Ireland very much politicised, as seeing, it was the first time we saw army on the streets. And also the discussions were about, people were talking about, because the inner cities had erupted in 81 and 85, and so the Irish Republican youth were telling us about, you can't have spontaneous riots, you have to be organised, and you have to do this, you have to do that, and so there's a lot of parallels.
There had been a range of meetings, and we managed to get some of the key people to come and speak.
It was a packed hall meeting during the time of the Lancaster House discussions. And Edison Zavobo spoke, and I remember he said, "The call is terrorists. If fighting for my people's liberation means I'm a terrorist, so be it. I'm proud of it." And he listed a whole series of injustices that were taking place to Africa and against Africans in Zimbabwe, about the denial of land. And if trying to get those back through the use of arms meant he was being called a terrorist, then he was proud of it. And I remember the room just was electric every time he said, "I'm proud to be a terrorist," because we were shouting, "Well, we're all terrorists," or whatever words we could think, but our ululation and our screaming and shouting really were the fact that, yes, we're all proud to be terrorists. And isn't it so strange today that, almost the same sort of language is back?
There is a movement out there, of extreme right-wing sympathisers, if not members, that is in existence, and I fear that racist attacks are going to be on the increase, and therefore, if anything of a legacy, I hope that people will recognise that they need an organisation like the Asian Youth Movement that sort of brings the people, the Asian youth together from different religious backgrounds, from different backgrounds.
I think we were closest to, as I say, a grassroots mass movement that we've ever had in our communities was probably during the Asian Youth Movements.
Well, the first point I think I learnt then was that to anchor yourself in the history of those who've struggled before you. And that's exactly what we were doing as well.
I would say to the youth of Bradford, Don't listen to the politicians. Don't listen to the council and its officers. Right? Organise yourselves.
If, as a political organisation or as an organisation fighting for something that we truly believe in, then there's no way we can get money from those that we fight against.
The key thing I think that is we've lost is those independent grassroots community organisations, that self-reliance. You know, I think they were the key features of Asian youth movements, and I would encourage, you know, generations today that we have to continue to organise. You know, Frans Fanon once said, you know, every generation that comes into being faces an historic task. It either subsumes itself to the forces before it, or it actually takes up the struggle to move it forward. And today, I think, you know, we need to continue.
So when we fought, we opened the legalities and created new things. And when you fight back, you always find an answer. That's what I learned through whether it's an immigration campaign or self-defense. But if you fight back organized and have people supporting you, you'll find the answer and you will win.
So the school life really was a bit of a prison, because most of us would not actually venture out into the surrounding areas. If you went to the local shops, you constantly got chased, money got taken off you, you got beaten up. There was probably about 30 or 40 sort of South Asian or black children in that school. And I think the first year was kind of trying to get know people, and kind of, it took 6 months or a year before people sort of started actually openly talking about what it was like and living or going to the school and the life in school and outside the school. And as I think people made friends, and certainly had probably about 8 or 9 other sort of South Asian students in that school who came kind of a little a circle of friends really, where we kind of talked about things, and actually reached a point where we thought we can't actually carry on with the situation as it was, and kind of, you know, checking out each other for what can we do and how we can change things. And I suppose I never thought of it and never realised at the time, but that was probably the kind of a process of sort of organising and becoming involved and becoming an anti-racist activist in a sense, which was something that was, you know, that wasn't in my mind in the slightest, or even, I didn't even understand that that's what we were actually doing. But that process, you know, was exactly that in a sense. And we actually devised strategies and sort of 3 or 4 identified to actually, you know, find a martial arts instructor who would sort of give us sort of a speedy lessons and kind of avoid the sort of normal protocols, as to learn about what was necessary for us to actually defend ourselves, you know. And there were other people who actually regularly brought weapons in their bags, and it became a kind of a thing that we would defend ourselves and not be beaten up every day. So by the end of the first year, there was a 8 to 10 of us who kind of were very focused in terms of trying to survive and organise on those bases, and the actual schooling somewhat went out the window to a degree, I think, and it's ironic that that particular group of people actually never were successful academically, even after leaving school, with I think 1 or 2 exceptions who had to then maybe do extra work after leaving school to kind of catch up with things. We had dinner times, or kind of, we would actually have martial arts classes in the surrounding wards, where these 3 or 4 people who were the regular attendants would come back and actually teach us what they'd actually learned. So it was quite an interesting process, and by the time we were actually sort of coming towards the age of 15, there was a particular gang of a group of people outside the actual school who were the main culprits, actually, in terms of actually taking the money off us, bullying, calling us names. And most Friday afternoons were particularly sort of end of term or holiday, last day of holiday, were the sort of very common packy bashing days, and most South Asian students didn't actually go to school on that day. I think what maybe inspired us to change a little bit was that there was a particular English teacher. I mean, the whole school teachers were actually aware of what was going on, but I think it was an environment where I think people wouldn't go out of way to do anything, and also I think there was probably an acceptance, well, that's the way things are, it's nothing all that unusual. And he was actually quite, for his time, I think, fairly radical. He was the only one that I certainly managed to have some rapport, or felt that I could have a decent relationship as a student. And a couple of the friends were sort of in the English class discussing, because we used to have an English lesson on Friday, and he was saying he would be giving out certain things or results, and I was saying, well, can't you give them out today, because we might not be sort of here on Friday. And people were a little bit more open with him, I think, and he said, well, he sort of took 3 or 4 of us to the side and said, I know exactly what's going on, and I know why you won't be here, but you could ask why the school doesn't do anything about it, but I'm not. It was actually on a year's contract, so it was a temporary placement, but I'm more interested in what can you do about it. If you by this time we were in sort of 4th form, so and I think the 3 or 4 of us were quite sort of large in size as well, so quite sort of tall and whatever, and most other kids will look up to you to actually give a sense of leadership and see you as setting examples. If you don't actually come up on Fridays to school, who will get beaten up instead of you? It will be the younger kids. But if enough of you stand together, do you think you'll be able to, would they still carry on doing this? And I think that really kind of inspired us to say, well, actually maybe we need to take a different approach, and we did. And this particular gang that we used to actually harass us, there was you call it a gang leader, I suppose. That the main person was a sort of, I think it was probably 19 or 20, very ginger hair, freckles, and we didn't know his name, but we just called him Ginger. Basically, that's how it was known to everybody. And I think that Friday afternoon we did go back to school. We didn't actually stay off school, and about 4 of us who went to the local shop, and he was on his own, actually walking towards the shop, and we would always either run off or move out of his way, or get slapped and get money taken off us if we didn't. And we sort of looked at each other and sort of said, well, and a couple of the lads did have things in their bags as well, and we said to each other, if we're going to make a stand, then we've got to do it today, you know, because we've talked about it enough. We know what we need to do, and he's on his own, and there's 4 of us, and we're not going to get a better opportunity. And we all decided, right, we will walk past him. In fact, we will walk in his direction, and we will not move out today. We will expect him to actually make way for us. If he doesn't, we just have to do what we have to do. And we were actually really shitting ourselves as we started walking towards him, and he could see, you know, sort of as eye contact, and you could see on his face, why aren't the bastards running off or moving, you know, why are they walking this way? We kind of reached a point where we were literally about a yard away from him, and he stopped, and we stopped, and he did say, you know, get at me where your fucking pack is. And we looked at each other and said, we're not going anywhere. If you want to walk either through us or you can walk around us, it's your choice today. And he stood there and stared at us really frighteningly, and we just somehow I think we managed to look menacing enough as ourselves as well, despite how we were feeling. And he did. After about minutes there, he walked around us and actually sort of, you know, head down and just walked off. And that was the most liberating experience, I think, and something which I will never ever forget. That was.
This is interesting because I think this is where the Asian youth movement really kind of started. It was in the library cafe, in the Central Library Cafe. I don't know if Marcia talked about that and others. But there used to be a group of, as they were kind of Asian lads, black Afro-Caribbean as well, and white kids as well. We used to kind of go in the library cafe and, when it opened in the morning, and we'd get a cup of tea. We didn't have much money, so we'd all kind of buy a cup of tea because you couldn't kind of. So we'd all kind of have this cup of tea there just to prove that we were bona fide. And we'd do crosswords, the Guardian crossword and things like that was one of the things. We all used to kind of try and do the Guardian crossword. But we used to share what we were reading, and then it would get into disputes about certain, you know, politics, and they would say, well, go and get the book. And so the library was like our kind of reference. It was, you know, we were talking, I can remember reading Capital, Marx's Capital, and discussing that, and talking about Gramsci and all these other people. And this was around the age of 16, 17. And becoming politicised. But that was really good because I was also reading about the empire and about colonialism at the same time. So both of them kind of came together as a critique of capital. You know, and Sivanandan's work. And so there was a kind of, it was a pure education. It was reading and then seminars. So the library cafe became a kind of a seminar room. You know, kind of education for liberation.
I think as chair of the AYM, there are a number of things really. One is I felt that, you know, you had to recruit a lot. I spent a lot of my time recruiting. Most people wouldn't actually even recognise that I did that, because I realised that any advocacy organisation required at least, you know, a small handful of very bright leaders, but also required another half a dozen runners or contributors to organising. There's a magic number of organisers you need to make anything happen, and I can tell you to this day, my business life, running PLC companies, it's absolutely true still. So you know, my training came from somewhere else to run big PLCs. You still need that golden number of people, and so I was forever trying to persuade people to get engaged with things, and it wasn't. I never really said this is, you know, what the AYM was about. I used to say, what do you believe in? You know, would you like to make a contribution? And it was trying to get people to personally engage in things in that way, because a lot of people, even in the 80s, you know, today, for example, we complain about the lethargy of youth or the apathy of
political movements. I experienced that the same in the 80s. It was a fewer group of organisers. It may have been that at that period there was a stronger willingness to participate in organised activities, but there was still, that apathy in this country of actually standing up for and articulating what you believed in. And so, as our leader, I spent a lot of time recruiting people, but actually organising things, from writing leaflets to designing leaflets. I've got a design background, so I'd find myself not only writing things, but actually with a ruler and a pencil, actually laying out things. I mean, if only we had desktop publishing in those days, it would have been wonderful to. I did everything. I was on the streets, leafleting, fundraising, organising social events. I mean, nothing was beyond me, to do. When we had socials, I'd cook, because I cook a lot, so I'd be in the kitchen cooking, as our leader. So it didn't really matter much to me what I did, and that. And I think that Oddist's contribution was perhaps on demonstrations where actually I tried to organise them, properly with stewards and things. Because I was ever so taken aback by how badly organised demonstrations were, and that. So, I think somebody actually laughed at me when I said I wanted a stewards meeting the day before a demonstration, and so they said, "What do you want one of those for?" And I said, "Well, these demonstrations can fall into trouble, and lots of people come and they need to understand where their support is. If you get arrested or anything happens and that." And I said, what seemed a novel idea at the time was writing down the name of a solicitor on a piece of printed paper, and things like that. That was so basic. No one would ever even think to actually do those things. So that, to give you a slight demonstration of my fairly granular engagement in the organisation, that's what it was about.
We were very emotional and very close together. And I remember one particular demonstration that we had. It might have been about Said Rahman. And I think it was the biggest demonstration that was organised on immigration case. I'm pretty certain it was about Said Rahman. I can't remember any other big campaign that we. And when we came into the city centre, I can never forget the immense shouting and echoing of all the Asians and all the youth together. And there must have been about 3,000 people there. And that was the biggest. Like I say, that was the first stepping stone of the campaigns, and there was a lot of aggression that was shown in that demonstration, and we felt we have achieved something by organising this, and the fact that we've made an impact on the campaign, and yes, it has been worthwhile, our organisation doing something. And that I think that was the first one that was majorly organised, and which showed, yes, there is backing for this Asian youth movement. I'm pretty certain that was the first one. I can't remember exactly what year it was in. I remember a couple of incidents that when we came down Cheapside and turned into town centre towards Town Hall, I think one, not just one, more than one, few of the police officers were trying to pick out certain people, and they had, because I had leather gloves on, and we were young, and it was quite aggressive, and they started sort of closing in. And we were, although we were told to stay in fours, but we were the stewards as well, let's say, on the outside, and they were sort of pushing and shoving people around, and we just, at that moment in time, we told everybody to stay calm, but keep shouting, don't worry. And the whole town actually echoed, and they had to step back and because it was organized so well. It was at that time that we realized, yes, they are. If we keep to our lines, and if we keep to our side of, I mean, they didn't want, I think it might have been somebody walked into one of the bollards, and the police tried to grab him. I think it was me, actually, but I was pulled away straight away. But they couldn't grab anybody because there was that much intense pressure on them. And there were loads of incidents on the way. Loads of people were shouting back at us and abusing us, and the more they did that, and the more we felt that we were achieving something, and we showed them how we felt. And it was like, at the end of the day, it was an achievement. And that was the biggest, well, at that time, I think that was probably the biggest campaign that we did. My mother was absolutely gutted. I mean, she went through terrible phases, but my father's been very strong. He's always maintained everything will be okay, fine, don't worry, whatever father and mother, they're kind of, in their own way, they were religious. They're, a lot of moral support was given to my mother during the campaign, because everybody used to go and see her. And, I can remember she used to literally burst out in tears in front of everybody, and she used to say, well, thanks for, giving me that support, because without that, I think she would have been even more demoralized. But that helped her come to terms with it, with the fact that everybody used to say, well, whatever he's done, it's okay, right? He did it for everybody. And the more she heard that from other people, the more confident that she got. And I used to sort of take her down with me to see him, and it gave a lot of support. The campaign itself, people who used to come and see her, morally, they did a lot. So eventually she came around to the fact that, yes, this campaign needs that support, and they are going to be freed. The only way they're going to be done. But they also sort of, inverted commonly, they had this religious thing that's saying, well, God's going to help them.
Sure.
I mean, I was really surprised. Like I said, my father sort of, everything will be all right. Because he knew a lot of people in Leeds, a lot of the Sikh community in Leeds. In fact, a lot of the Gurdwaras, they even brought the food for the picketers outside, which I was absolutely amazed to see, because normally you don't see Sikh older generation coming out and sitting with the picketers and supporting them. I think that had a hell of a lot of impact on the campaign during the period of the trial. And those old guys were, they took a stand, and they basically said, yes, we are supporting this. And I think Father did it in his own way. He did his own bit, because he used to stand market in Leeds, right? And he knew a lot of people, and they came through for him, and they all knew what our family's like, But I mean, that is one instance that sticks in my mind when I was absolutely shocked, shell-shocked really, to see all of them there. Well, you know, this is brilliant.
Well, it was quite a scary time because I think I had a phone call from Jayesh to say that Tariq and Talochan had been arrested. And then after that, then I just watched the news, like glued to it without anybody, and really terrified. And Jay said, I wouldn't be surprised if they come questioning you or whatever, because so the 2-3 days leading up, I think it was on the 3rd or 4th day that they came to my house, because I was, I think, one of the only girls that was ever questioned. And it was really early in the morning, and I can remember because it was the fasting month. And it was almost like I was expecting them to come, but at the same time terrified, thinking, oh my God, it's going to be awful for the family. And I think I was at Jay's house, because I knew it was going on. On the Saturday I'd gone with my little baby niece up to Jay's house, because he lived in a student house up by the university, to see what was going on and ask him. And while I was there, the police came and arrested, sort of said they'd taken him for questioning. And I think one of the guys that he shared the house was the president of the student union, and I remember him saying, oh, that's it, he's not going to be coming back. So I went home quite frightened, thinking, oh my God, you know, it was one by one they were kind of coming. So I don't know, I can't remember, was it the next day or the day after that they came for me? And then my elder brother came with me. Most of the other family members were in bed, or my mum didn't know what was going on. And my elder brother says to me, oh, they just want to question her because of, you know, some of her friends being arrested for the stuff, because it was on the news. And then I got questioned about it, and most of the question was around the meeting that we were supposedly we were having at Jay's house, and the day that they supposedly made the petrol bombs and all that sort of stuff, and I was there. So, you know, I gave a very short statement and said, you know, we didn't have a meeting because not everybody was there, and I told them what movie was on the TV and things. I said I was busy watching that and things like that. So there was lots of, and I think I was there quite a few hours, and they were trying to put words in my mouth, and I don't know why they decided not to, because I was the only one that was there that didn't get charged. Right. So, and I don't know whether they made a decision because when they picked me up, you know, my shalwar kameez, I was fasting as well, because they tried to offer me tea and coffee, and I said, so I'm fasting, you know, so I don't know whether they thought, no, this isn't going to go with, you know, because at least they could call the 12 of them sort of yobos or fanatics or whatever, but having a girl, a 19-year-old girl there as well was... So, and I remember they had, and I suppose the frightening bit about it was they had they put all the pictures, because they asked me about the United Park Youth League, and I was kind of vague about it and said I wasn't really sure if it was a group or we just met. And then they had all these pictures of us with the Gary Pemberton campaign, you know, pictures of us outside the magistrates' courts and a few of the marches, and they said, you know, you can't stay because you're there at the front with the leaders, you know, you're always there at the front, you're not somebody in the background, so you must know more. And it was just like, I suppose it was quite a scary time for a family that had never been to the police station.
The only incriminating evidence against me was what somebody else had said, because I'd never admitted being involved in any of it, which the legal team then saw that as a chink in the armour in terms of putting a nail through their case. Because if they can get me off, that's going to definitely dent their the prosecution case. So that obviously didn't go down well with some of my co-defendants, who were not pleased about that. But I think they eventually saw value of what had happened, because I was released at half time. The judge had released me on no case no answer, which meant that was seen as a big dent. And because the others had admitted on paper what they'd done, whereas I was the only one who said no. So then I was able to then support the campaign from outside. But yeah, I mean, that was quite stressful. And then of course the first day of the trial, there's a whole Leeds Crown Court surrounded by, you know, Free the Bradford 12. You could hear the chanting inside the court. That was quite, you know, put the hair up your chest. And then when the prosecution then ran out of the case, of course, and the defence had accepted that, yeah, we'd made the bombs and all this kind of stuff. The campaign then had switched to self-defence is no offence. So that was a very interesting time. And then well, probably read some of the stuff, but because I was released at half time, then I worked with Delochan's brother, Kuku. He lived with me for a while because he'd lost his job, lost his earnings. So that was quite intensive because he put a lot of time. I keep forgetting the guy's name though. The Caribbean guy, Courtney Hayes, because Courtney was involved in the campaign from the beginning, and then there were differences that came up with, because there's a national committee set up, and Southwark contacts of Director Delochan all got involved. It became a national campaign, so a lot of it was beyond our control then. And locally, when I was released, I was working with Kuku in terms of getting some of the logistical stuff done. And then in the university, there were some guys who were prepared to help. I remember there was an African guy, and he managed to produce a lot of Bradford 12 t-shirts, red ones. So it's that kind of stuff that we did then, and the posters, all this kind of stuff. For me, my family in history doesn't hold any future near, you know, because I always had the feeling that it never did hold, you know, when I was younger. I never thought of a future near, right, you know. That's my own thing, right, you know, my own feeling, right, you know. So, and my future is, you know, where you come from, you belong there, right, you know. So, you know, the Englishman remembers his rolling hills, right. We remember our old, you know, and the same thing, right, you know. He remembers his country, we remember our country, right. I mean, no matter what, we're still foreigners there. You know, well, I see no future where we belong, that's our future, right? So what do you think? I mean, you know,
basically it was at that point in time when the government, I guess, started to discriminate or decided to put a different fee structure for overseas students to home students, and it was almost 3 or 4 times the amount. So even at that age, even at all those many years ago, 30 years ago, the fee that I had to pay was something like £3,000 a year. I mean, I could hardly keep my head above water with regards to daily expenses and so on. Even in Sheffield, I worked 4 nights a week, weekends, in bars and pubs and discos and so on, just to be able to pay the fees. So I could feel the direct pressure in terms of, my God, am I going to pay all this additional money? They gave you loans and all that kind of stuff to take as well. So basically, organization grew up with regards. Actually, Sheffield played a pretty important lead in putting pressure on the NUS, National Union of Students, at that point in time. Sheffield was, I think, one of the first universities to go into occupation, occupied administration buildings, just to voice the protest, show protest. Got a lot of press coverage. People slept in the administration buildings for, I think we must have been there for at least a week or 10 days or so. You know, it was a big impact on you. And slowly, other universities got involved. I remember making a trip up to Manchester University, showing solidarity with those people up there, sleeping in their university for a couple of days. We came down to London School of Economics was pretty prominent in the school side because there were loads of overseas students at LSE. And for me personally, because that's all the activity that was happening, I mean, for me it was the development of my political being at that point in time. I did it a little bit because I knew the Malaysian students, I knew the Malaysian friends, and you know, it's interesting, when we were back in Malaysia, we probably know the Malaysian situation where there's the Chinese, the Indians and the Malays and so on. When we were young, we are pretty much the same, we play the same games and so on. When you get to my parents' level, my parents would always say it's the bloody Malays who get everything and so on and so forth, because you face the brutality of some of the legislation that comes out. But at university, we were all one together in terms of the different races. So that brought us together and we kept going, and I slowly got a little bit more political and a little bit more involved. And after that I got involved in, I don't know, socialist societies and so on. And in 78 or 79, a couple of friends of mine who were involved, well, I didn't know them then, but they became friends, who were involved in some of the work here in London, came up there. It's a guy called Pa Luthra. This was in 1979, and he came up and he started talking about racism and started talking those kind of issues with me. And we formed Black Consciousness Group up in university. And we produced, just like Kala Mazdoor and so on, produced newsletters and slowly started having workshops around understanding racism and so on and so forth. And became quite a big voice in the university itself. And we then realized that just within the confines of the university just didn't get us anywhere, you know. And it was at that point in time I started going out to the local Pakistani community, started going out to the youth clubs. That's where I met Sultan. Sultan, you know,
so when these meetings happened, there was youth workers, because I was a youth worker in '82. I was a volunteer from 1979. Right. I was a voluntary youth worker in Attica, but not getting paid for it. And it was only later on I got paid a few sessions, and I was working engineering, doing this as a and I'd been, but at the same time I was involved in SCAR. SCAR was a union, and it was led. I think it had different approach, and also it was more orientated towards the trade union movement, and it was towards the guy who was running it at that time. He's passed away now, but it's Richard Cabone's, you know, the MP in Sheffield. One of his relatives, whether his dad or his cousin, brother or whatever, I don't know. But it was George Cabone, who was the person who was a trade unionist. Right. He was one of the main people, and also the Morning Star people who were in them. and the Communist Party and other different groups. They were the ones behind it,
right.
trade camp. And I think I know the few of the black Uncle Toms, or people in the community, was so-called community leaders. They were involved in it, and they didn't really reflect the community, because they wouldn't go and march against the police because they were like very, very different. You know,
right.
They would support it, but they wouldn't. And I think but I think there was another difference, because there was a Asian community culturally different as well. There was, I think the ingredient that was missing was people from outside Sheffield who were involved in the local universities who came. They said, depending, because there were a couple of incidents where you had the Home Office Minister, Timothy Raisin, I think, in Sheffield. He got really badly treated because he was like deportation. That's the thing as well. The students movement in Sheffield at that time, there was a lot of people campaigning against deportation stuff around students and other things. They were involved in SCAR as well, Scale, because it was called different. Sheffield campaigning against all immigration laws, which was part of SCAR, Scale. You know, they were support. I think there was like a paper organisation. They were more of a affiliated. You could affiliate.
Right.
And I think it didn't do much of like it wasn't a combative organisation.
Yeah.
That's what the AYM was.
Right.
That was different, and I think the reason we set it up was due to that visit by AYM in Bradford, and I left SCAR after a while. You know, once I got involved in AYM.
I mean, earlier on, I mean, because the thing is, when that's at that age, you really don't understand real politics, you know. Well, there's always certain councillors here and there. I mean, they talked about the Labour Party, this one, but eventually we did realise, you know, the Labour Party is the same on deportations and immigration bills, and you know, the Labour Party passed, and we started. You have never heard Baba Bhaktora's song. I think he's got that. Labour the Tory, dome pehna sakiyan karge deport san dome hasiyan. So there's a political itself that is both Labour Party and the Tories are the same. You get the campaign that we had is really good. We used to put there's a cinema, show cinema down Soho Road. It's closer, but they let it to us. They said you could have it free. So we used to be in there. We used to do our recordings inside. People used to write songs. And Bhaktora used to get the musicians in. And we've done a lot of recordings. And we used to put the big speakers out outside, so people walking past them. In the election campaign, we stood in the election as well, Baba Bhaktora. I was in the car putting the loudspeakers on and going, and Balev election, and all that. It was fun as well. You know? We worked for picketing and campaign, because everywhere that he had a court appearance or tribunal, we used to be there, you know, all the time. You know, 20, 30 people, 100 people, 50 people sometimes. I think they're putting pressure on them. I think eventually, they're probably the Home Office, you know, they made it this. I think he got married as well or something. And then they let him stay and all that, but you know, they just thought, you know, we don't want these people probably said, you know, protesting every weekend. I think they probably said, okay.
I mean, in every way we wanted to be self-reliant. So if we were self-reliant and still reliant on Karl Marx for understanding, you know, our predicament, then we weren't very self-reliant, because he was, you know, German, Jewish, whatever, white anyway. But through SIVA, we then got introduced to actually reading our own people. You know, I mean, from those small beginnings, we went back to Faiz Ahmad Faiz. You know, we went back and read stories from India and, you know, revolutionary stories. We start to understand that some of the Hindi songs that our parents sang, right? Like, I mean, I can remember one that my mum and my dad used to listen to all the time, and it went something like "Kal ki baat purani hum Hindustani," you know, and it was it was saying, you know, yesterday is an old story, you know, we're Indian, yeah, or Hindustani, and you know, yesterday's an old story, and it was about freedom and so on. So we were suddenly able to, you know, say, right, oh, that actually can belong to us, without us feeling that we suddenly become Indian, because we don't. Or we lose our Indianness because we're here in Birmingham. And we were able to go from that to Charu Mazumdar and understand that what Naxalbari was and so on. And actually contort these things into black power. Right? Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Naxalbari ever meant to be, part of the black consciousness process, but for us it became that. So as we looked at the IWAs and tried to dialogue with them, and tried to discourse with them, we tried to suggest to them, actually, your Naxalbari sounds awfully like black power to us. And then we discovered things like Subhash Chandra Bose, and he's my enemy's enemy's my friend, and and the Brits had just told us he was a fascist apologist, and we didn't need any affiliation with him. And if we wanted heroes, then the heroes would be Gandhi and Nehru. Nobody told us. So actually, we can find our own heroes in the form of Bhagat Singh, or Lala Rajput Rai, or Charu Mazumdar, or our very own. Because that's why the calendar came out. In a sense, the calendar represented the movement we made. Udham Singh, became our very own hero. And I mean, there's nothing that more disappoints me in the 21st century than to think that whenever I go to Vancouver now, there was a similar martyr in Vancouver called Meva Singh, and there's a big statue erected in his honour by the Sikh communities of the Fraser Valley. But nothing here in the UK around Udham Singh, and yet the AYMs resurrected him momentarily, and Bhagat Singh, and so on. And I mean, I suspect my children know less of these people than we knew, right? And it's because initially Siva gave us the right to join up the dots, to allow us to be moments in time, that included, atomization from an Indian village to a Brahmi, neighbourhood. And that was that was pretty effective in giving us a sense of we'd actually arrived. We could now organise in a proper, give ourselves a name, call ourselves what we are, Asian Youth. And I think by that time it was Asian Youth, because the black didn't work, and it didn't work because we didn't. The ghetto experience of segregating communities had started, so Caribbean communities were living elsewhere and doing other things and fighting other struggles. And we also had this belief that genuine alliances, instead of the mythical alliances of the trade union and so-called labour movement, we would make genuine alliances of communities, and they would come out of people engaged in struggle against a common enemy, and making alliances out of dignity and respect, not out of assumptions that, and so on.
In terms of the Afro-Caribbean, we had developed by then, because some of these Afro-Caribbeans, whether I liked them or not at school, the fact is I knew them.
Sure.
I'd grown up with them. And some of them, so we played football and, in that and all this. So the link with the Afro-Caribbean was very close. And they were part of the Southall Youth Movement, although later on another organization was kind of set up called People's Unite, led by them. But throughout, the thing was kind of totally mixed.
Right.
Yeah? So even now, I got a very close relationship with these kind of guys. So I think that was kind of different. So when we kind of mobilized, you mobilize them as well. So that's how it worked. And, they were always in the building that we squatted this building, that was our headquarters. It was a totally mixed crowd always.
Right.
Yeah? And then we were great supporters of the local band Misty in Roots. They're all my friends. And they did also a tremendous amount in terms of fundraising for us. And every time, people got arrested, we raised tens of thousands of pounds. Because the network was so huge,